It's absolutely great to see so many RBA members and Paramount supporters here today. This is our first function in 2 years, 2.5 years. Thank you, COVID. By way of introduction, to our guest speaker, I'd like to tell you the story about how I found Claire. Driving into work one morning, I pressed the wrong button on the radio, and I'm tuned into national radio, and there's an interview. Right at the beginning of the interview, Claire Nelson is telling her story about how she was working in London, how she was getting frustrated with the London rat race and the pressure of working under tight deadlines. The rest of the story I would spoil for Claire if I carried on. So let's hear from Claire. And ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Claire to the podium. I'll use the stairs.
Oh. When is someone going to come looking for me? This heat is trying to get to me. I won't let it. Hello, everyone. Thought I'd open with a bit of drama there. This video I recorded when I'd been lying in that patch of desert in that same spot for 53 hours. And I didn't know it at the time, but I would be lying there for another 22. And I didn't actually know if I would ever move from that spot and if I'd ever be found at all. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes. Okay, fabulous. But before I get into that story, I'm going to ask you just to do one thing for me, and that's to make sure that your water glasses are filled, because I have a feeling that this story might make you a little bit thirsty. And even if it doesn't, I am now a very strong advocate for hydration. So now I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I was born here in Auckland, but I grew up in Wellington, so the part of New Zealand I say I'm from depends really on who I'm talking to and who's asking. But I was a typical 80s Kiwi kid. I was always outdoors, climbing trees, walking on the beaches, making forts, getting into trouble. The thing is, I didn't really appreciate the outdoors when I was in New Zealand. That's the irony of it. I thought New Zealand was a little bit boring, a little bit quiet, not much to do, except all this outdoors stuff. And so I always wanted to do something, be somewhere else, be somewhere bigger. I felt like a fish in a small bowl, and I wanted to grow. So I did what a lot of Kiwis do, and I moved to London. And I moved to London for 1 year. 17 years later, I still live there. And I love London. London is a fantastic place. It's full of stories. It's full of history. I felt like there's possibility around every corner, that I had every opportunity to build the life that I wanted for myself and to be the best version of myself that I could be. The thing about London, though, is it's also a very good place to hide. And so I found it was somewhere where I could hide those parts of myself that I wasn't proud of, that I didn't think measured up, that I didn't think was good enough. I could just put my best side forward all the time. And somehow, over the years, didn't even realize I was doing this, I was just projecting this surface version of myself. And despite living my best life all this time, I was also feeling lonely and unhappy. So, despite having a good social circle and a job as a food and travel journalist, these feelings of anxiety and depression and loneliness, they just grew and grew. And, as part of the course and putting my best foot forward and presenting my best self, I buried those feelings down. And the more that I buried, the more that I buried those feelings down, the more they started to show in other ways. So I'm a big believer in the fact that where the mind goes, the body follows. So the more I pushed those feelings down, the more my body started to show signs of tension and stress and pain. And I thought to myself, well, what is it that I am missing here? I couldn't quite figure it out. But one thing I did know I was missing was nature. And I thought, if I can spend more time in nature, then maybe that'll give me some answers. Now, I'm not talking about parks and trees and things like that. As important as they are, they're very valuable. We should embrace them. I'm talking about big nature, capital B, capital N. Sort of the vast wildernesses, if you will. So when the magazine I was working for shut down, I took that as an opportunity to head for the hills, the big ones. I moved to Canada, the New Zealand of the Northern Hemisphere, if you will, just very, very big. And the plan was there to spend a bit of time travelling around, spending time in the outdoors, hiking, dog sledding, and also just trying to figure out where I might want to put down anchor for a while, find some work, settle down. Find somewhere where I'd be like, now I feel happy with my life. I just needed a new location. And it was about probably 2 months into this new journey when an old friend of mine got in touch and said, do you want to come down and house sit for us for 3 weeks? We live in Joshua Tree in Southern California. And I thought, yeah, absolutely. Because it's big nature. It's just a different type of big nature. Has anyone here been to Joshua Tree? Raise your hands. A couple of you have. What would be one word you'd use to describe it? Expansive. There you go. Exactly. It's a big place. And for those of you who haven't been, I'm going to give you a bit of a geography lesson. So Joshua Tree is a couple of hours inland from Los Angeles, and at the heart of it is this expansive national park. So that park itself is about 3 times the size of Auckland. And I want to give you some context for this. It's made up of 2 different deserts. The first one is the most popular part of the desert. This is the high desert, the Mojave. It's the one that people most recognize from the cover of the U2 album. And it's the one where most visitors will go to. It looks like that. So these are the Joshua trees. They're basically big succulents, so that gives you an idea of the type of climate that is in the Mojave. The other side of the desert is the Colorado desert. This is the low desert. It's a lot hotter. It's a lot drier. There are fewer visitors. Joshua trees don't even grow there because it's too hot and too dry. So I'd spent a bit of time in the, let's go back. Spent a bit of time in the Mojave Desert doing a lot of the walks. If you do go to the national park, you can just drive up. You can do a 10-minute walk, a half-an-hour walk. So we did a lot of those. But I was excited to walk in the lower desert. There was one trail in particular that I was very excited about. It was called the Lost Palms Oasis Trail. The idea is that you walk for about 13 kilometers there and back, and at the end of that trail is a big cluster of California palm trees, which, as you can imagine, in a landscape like this, looks really, really cool. And so I set off, and I basically planned a big day trip. So I just got my license to move to Canada. I was very excited for the big drive. It takes an hour and a half to drive across the national park. And so it was going to be a full day out. And I'd also planned to go on a Tuesday on this walk, because I thought to myself, Tuesday there's fewer people in the park. I would have it to myself. And hindsight is a wonderful, wonderful thing. So I was very happy on the trail. I was very much enjoying it. It was a beautiful day, very, very hot. I'd stopped in at the ranger station on the way just to see if there's anything I should know about. He said, just make sure you've got enough water, which I did. Check. I was a couple of miles in. I'm trying to do the conversion to kilometres. I'm still in miles in my head. A couple of hours of walking. And the trail came to this stack of boulders. Now, these stacks of boulders are everywhere. I didn't think anything of it. I thought, okay, and up I went, up the stack of boulders, and I stood looking at this view, just taking it all in. I know it just looks like a big pile of rocks, but it's pretty impressive when you're there. And I sat there and I finished the last of the water that was in my first bottle and thought to myself, I'm really lucky to be here. I'm in big nature. Maybe there is something to this. And then I had to get down. And what I will say again is that hindsight is a wonderful thing. And at no point here did I feel any sense of danger. At no point did my risk radar go off. No point did I feel worried. It seems strange to say that now. But I had to get myself across this boulder stack. It was too far down to go straight over. I had to go off to the right, make my way down that way. No sweat, no problem. I'm a New Zealander, I'm used to climbing around on rocks, that's what we do. So I started to test my footing out. Now, if you can imagine, there's a big smooth rock next to me. It's far too big for me to just stretch my leg over, so I'm having to step onto it and swing myself across. I reach down, put my footing, test my footing on the rock. I've got a foothold, it's all good. Put a bit more weight on it, still good. And so I go for it, except my foot doesn't hold. I felt myself start to slide, and everything went in slow motion. It's such a funny cliche, but it's true, and now I know what they're talking about. If anyone's been in a situation like that and everything just slows down. I had in one hand my hiking stick, the other hand I'm grabbing at the rock, but there's nothing that I could do. It would only have been a couple of seconds, but it felt very, very long. And I just remember my brain giving me a warning, just saying, you're about to get hurt, get ready. And I fell off the edge. I later learnt I'd fallen about 8 meters, but all I remember was the sound. It was a loud crack, and that was the sound of my pelvis breaking. I was on my back. Thankfully, I hadn't landed on any rocks, on a clearing with these massive boulders around me, and suddenly I realized I can't move from the waist down. It's a horrible, horrible feeling. I did, however, know that I could move my toes, so I wasn't paralyzed. It's a little bit of comfort in an otherwise uncomforting moment. But I couldn't move, couldn't get up. So I grabbed for my rucksack, I dial 911, no signal. Of course there's no signal. I'm in the middle of the national park, I'm in the middle of the desert, there's no signal. But I keep trying all the same. There's always that little voice in your head that thinks your iPhone's going to save you somehow. It doesn't save you. And so then that realization, okay, I can't tell anyone that I'm here. I also didn't tell anyone where I was going. Number one hiking rule, hey, tell someone where you're going. I didn't do that because I'd become so confident and so used to being in my own company and so used to doing this. The thing about confidence is it breeds complacency. You get used to doing something enough, you stop preparing for the risks. And, oh, that's right, I'm also in another country house sitting, so no one's expecting me back. And the people I was house sitting for were not due back for another week and a half. So that was the moment when I'm like, this is a really bad situation. It could not be worse. Now my only lifeline was for another hiker to come by on the trail. And as I was combing through my phone, just trying to find something that might help me, I noticed my GPS was still working, so that was something. And I looked at the map of where I was. This is an actual screen grab I took in that moment. And I was staring at it, and I was going, that's weird. That little squiggly line is the trail, and I'm the blue dot. I'm not on the trail. I'm about 1.5 miles off the trail. Somewhere along the way, I'd taken a wrong turn. And it was while looking at the screen that I was like, well, that's it. I'm going to die. I'm going to die right here. And it was the most clear realization that I could have. Okay, well, this is it. This is how it ends. And then I put it out of my head. I know we've all heard about survival instinct, but when you experience it, it's quite something else. In that moment, it was like my brain went, okay, so you're going to die. We'll just put that over here. let's just focus on the problems that are in front of us. So I basically sort of was observing my own brain doing that, sort of, in the Terminator, and he's looking at things and a little data comes up. It was like that. So my brain was combing through the archives of every weird little piece of knowledge that I'd read or heard or someone had told me, and trying to find things that might be useful. And it was all about trying to deal with the problem that was the worst and most imminent problem, which was the heat. So in Joshua Tree National Park, you can get into, this was May, and in Joshua Tree National Park, you can get up into the 30s Celsius. It's hot, it's a very dry heat. It's like if you open an oven door and you get hit with that awful heat, it's like that. And I was in the open, exposed to it. So I knew that my priority now was to deal with the heat in any way that I could. I was wearing shorts and a vest and a hat, and I had a t-shirt in my bag. So I thought, okay, well, I need to try and cover myself up as best I can, but of course I can't move my legs. So I used my hiking stick to apply sunscreen to my legs, and then I covered it up with the t-shirt, the plastic bag, and my hat. And then I had another plastic bag that I used to create a sunshade. And I held this up between me and the sun during daylight hours to keep myself in the shade as best I could. So basically, I had nothing else to do except wait and see if someone came by, which, why would they? I'm not on the trail. And then it started to get dark. And this is the thing. It's bad to be injured on a trail during the daytime, but being injured on a trail at nighttime, that's serious. That's when you know this is bad. And it's really, really scary. I'm lying on the ground, completely vulnerable, and it's starting to get dark. Any guesses what I might be the most worried about at this point? Yeah, it's peak rattlesnake season. I was so worried about it being peak rattlesnake season that I took out unlimited health insurance. One, because it's America and you need to get health insurance. But I thought, if you get bitten by a rattlesnake, it's really expensive to get antivenom. And that was the worst possible thing I thought might happen to me out in the desert. So I was really, really scared of rattlesnakes. Now, I don't know if rattlesnakes come out at night. I don't know the optimal time for a rattlesnake to come out. But when you're lying on the ground and you can't move and it's dark and it's rattlesnake season, none of that matters. And darkness does really weird things to fear. It's why when you're lying in bed at night and you have your foot outside the duvet and you feel a little bit weird about it, and you put it back in, it's not about being rational or reasonable. This is what fear does. And I was lying there, and of course I'm surrounded by these big boulders, and I'm squinting into the darkness, and I see something. And as I squint a bit harder, I look at it, and I'm like, that's a snake. And it's moving. And I'm staring at this thing, and I'm staring at it, and my whole body is just completely frozen. But it's not getting any closer. So eventually I grab my iPhone, and I shine the light on it, and there's nothing there. My fear is messing with my imagination. And it continued to do this for the rest of the night. It was, without a doubt, the longest night of my life. So Wednesday, day 2, I wake up and I think, oh, thank God that's over. This will be a story. My mum's going to be really mad. But today someone's going to come by and they're going to find me and I'll get out of here. I still had to hold on to hope. It's such an important resource, I think, in terms of survival. If we have something to hope for, it'll keep us going. Unfortunately, my other resources were starting to dwindle at this point. My iPhone went flat. And so not only did I no longer have any way of telling the time, but that last little bit of hope that maybe this piece of technology, which is supposed to be able to do everything, might save me, that was gone. And then by lunchtime that same day, I ran out of water. So I thought I'd gone and prepared. I had been prepared for a day hike, and I'd taken 5 litres of water. The first litre of water I drank before I got to the boulder stack. Another litre of water, which was in one of those flasks that keeps things cool, I left it in the car on purpose because I thought, hey, when I get back from my walk and there's that cold bottle of water waiting in the car, that's going to be real, real nice. And I was like, gosh, I'm so smart. But I knew that bottle of water was still waiting for me there, and it was absolutely torturous. So I only had 3 litres, and I can tell you, in that heat, I was not able to ration it any more than I did. Within 24 hours, it was gone. And this is the point where you might want to have a drink of water, by the way. Because all I had to drink at that point was my own urine. And I will tell you, I did not hesitate to drink it. I was collecting it in a small paracetamol jar, tipping it into my empty drink bottle. Yes, it tastes exactly as you imagine it tastes. It's not nice, but it did sustain me. And I have strangely had a lot of people since the incident come forward and tell me that I was wrong to drink my own urine, that in fact you shouldn't drink it because it will just dehydrate you further. To which I say, if you are almost definitely going to die of dehydration, you take your chances. I will risk potential renal failure if those are my only options. And I have also since learned that you can actually drink it for a short period of time. So I knew it would sustain me, just not indefinitely. And as I say, all you can do in a survival situation is just deal with the imminent threat. And so then no one came by that day. And I spent another long night in the desert. It was cold, it was long. I did manage to sleep a little bit more, knowing the snakes were not real. By the Thursday, I woke up, and at this point I'm dealing with not just the pain of my injuries. I have a broken pelvis, a sprained ankle, and a broken toe, but also just the discomfort of being in the same spot that entire time. If you've ever sat through a really, really long theatre show, and that feeling when you feel like your bum's going to sleep, and it's really uncomfortable, it was like that for my whole body. In fact, today's Thursday. If you imagine where you were, think back to Tuesday. Think back to the first thing you did when you got up in the morning on Tuesday. Well, now, if you think that the first thing you did when you got up on Tuesday was to lie down on the ground, and you stayed there, and you were still there now, and you hadn't moved. It was that level of discomfort on top of the pain. So while my body was not in a great way, my kidneys hurt, everything hurt, I had to keep my mind in a good place. Because like I say, where the mind goes, the body follows. And I know that I didn't have a lot of options, but I just had to keep myself alive long enough that someone would figure out I was missing and maybe put all these pieces together. Even just going through all the what ifs, that became like another form of hope. It became like another thing to cling on to, and also to keep my mind busy. And so I was trying very hard to keep my spirits up. But the problem is I had a lot of time to think. And my mind started to wander from hope to regrets. It's the inevitable thing. I didn't think I was someone who believed in regrets. I think, we all make the best decisions at the time, and they shape us and they form us. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I did have one big regret, and that was fear, which might seem like a strangely broad regret to have, but what I mean by that is I had been living my life with fear in all the wrong places. So I wasn't afraid to go out into the desert on my own. I wasn't afraid to climb up a boulder stack. I wasn't afraid to move to London by myself, not knowing anybody. None of that was scary to me. And so I'd always had this thought in my head, I'm really fearless. I'm so brave. But I'm actually just a giant wuss. And, I look at my actual day-to-day life, and everything that formed my day-to-day life was fear-based. The imposter syndrome, fear of commitment, fear of failure, anxiety, public speaking. All of those things formed how I live my life. And they're all based in some kind of fear. And I thought, gosh, that's such a waste of time. And even calling myself someone who's very independent, that was kind of a crock as well. That was fear-based. It's so much easier to keep people at arm's length and so much easier to not need anybody else and call it independence. I'd become so bad at asking for help. Who here would say they're not very good at asking for help? Yeah, there's a lot of hands, right? Well, it's about fear. And so I thought, gosh, I really have everything in my life that forms me is fear-based. I mean, the irony of having the clarity that I went looking for when I moved to Canada, when it might now be too late to do anything with it. And the thing was, I now had to rely on other people to help me so much that if they didn't, I would die. And I had no way to ask. So I think over those days I went through the 5 stages of grief. There was the anger, where I was so mad at myself. There's the bargaining. I did a lot of praying. I'm not religious, but I did a lot of praying. There's the, what else have we got? There's denial. Nope, not going to die here, as you'll see in that video. The heat's getting to me, I won't let it. Nope. But I had reached the point of acceptance. And I remember, because that night there was like a strange calm over the desert. I remember very vividly, there was a giant full moon. It was so bright. Everything was really still. And this is the view of what I was looking at. And above me, something started to move around in the rocks. And thankfully not snakes, but they were little bats. And they'd started to come out and they were just flying around. And I was lying there watching them. And I thought, that's kind of nice. That's kind of beautiful. Because really what was going on is that the wildlife, and there's a lot of wildlife even though I couldn't see it, had finally decided that I wasn't a threat. And that really it was like I'd become a part of the landscape. And I found myself thinking, well, if this is where I die, and if this is the place where my bones will rest, then it's not the worst thing. And in a way, I kind of got lucky because I was in this beautiful place, and this is where I was going to, take my last breaths. And I remember going to sleep that night, feeling calmer and more at peace than I ever had before. And I went to sleep for what could have been the last time. Spoiler alert, I didn't die. I was still awake the next morning, and the only thing was, at this point, as I say, where the mind goes, the body follows, and having reached that point of acceptance, I started to let go of hope a little bit, and I was now so physically weak. I was so dehydrated. Food was a long ago memory. I tried to eat just to give myself some strength, but I was too dehydrated to A, be hungry, and B, to actually be able to swallow anything. I had no saliva. So I was now at my absolute weakest. I couldn't even hold up my sunshade, so I just layered on top of myself and I just waited. I didn't even know what I was waiting for anymore. This was a Friday and I thought, well, maybe there'll be more people in the park in the weekend, if I can hold on. But even then, what's the point? Because I'm not on the trail. It's sort of everything was against me as far as I was concerned. And so I just sort of lay there and I drifted in and out of consciousness in this sort of strange fever dream. I didn't have my life flash before my eyes, perhaps because this was going to be a slow death, but instead I remember having these strange fever dreams about my childhood. And so lost in that was I at the time that I almost didn't hear the voice when it came out of the sky. But I did come around, and I was like, wait, did I hear something? And then I heard it. It was a helicopter. And I was like, oh, that's real. Is it real or is it my imagination? Is this a dehydration? But then the voice came again. And the voice said, we're looking for a missing hiker over the PA. And I remember my first thought was, oh, is it me or is it somebody else? And I thought, well, even if it isn't me, they might find me as well. So this is a good opportunity. This is literally what my thought was. And I thought, okay, well, I need them to notice me. And I listened, I prepared, I waited to see if they'd come over. Instead, it got quieter and quieter and quieter. And then it was gone. And I tell you, I was so gutted in that moment. I thought, I can't believe it was so close to getting out of here. I need them to come back, though. Surely, surely, surely they'll come back. And I don't know how much time had passed. Time was now abstract. I had no idea of whether it was 5 minutes or half an hour or more. But I heard the helicopter come back again. And this time, I heard them say my name. And that was the moment where I'm like, someone's figured it out. I don't know how, but someone's figured out where I am. Maybe they found the car at the trailhead. Something's happened. And so I was feeling good. And I had this surge of adrenaline. And I waited for them to come back over. But I was like, wait a second, they're not going to come over here, because if they've figured out I was on the trail, I'm still 1.5 miles away. It just seems so futile. And I was screaming, even though no one's going to hear me. But that's what you do. But yet again, I heard the helicopter get quieter and quieter and quieter, and then it was gone. And to think that I had been that close to being rescued, that there was someone out looking for me, it was just, I cannot describe to you that frustration of not being able to do anything but wait and see if they come back. It felt like hours. I know it can't have been hours, but it felt like hours. And then I heard the helicopter come back. This time I was ready. I took my sunshade. I stretched out the plastic bag as big as I could. I put my straw hat on the top. And I thought, if they come back over, I'm going to be ready this time. And this time I heard them. They got louder. The blades got louder and louder, but I still couldn't see the helicopter. But I waved that stick as hard as I could. I held it up as high as I could, so I was holding the very tip of it and waving it with every inch of strength I had. My body hurt, didn't matter. I didn't know if it was going to do anything. But then I heard that voice come again, and this time they said, "We see you. We're going to come and get you." And that was, without a doubt, the greatest moment of my life. I've still got goosebumps, actually. And from that moment, it was just, I could let go. I didn't have to fight. And I remember just dropping the stick and collapsing and waiting. And it was just, that moment was like, oh, I had almost gone into shock, because I had just already accepted I was going to die, and then now I'm not going to die, and I didn't really know what to do with this information. But, it was a pretty good feeling. So the guys who saw me, they choppered down, and they had to try and get down to me. And I remember hearing these boots coming and hearing these voices from somewhere above me at the boulders. And so they called out and they said, "How did you get down there?" And I said, "The hard way." I mean, I was euphoric, like this, this kind of Kiwi humour just bubbles up to the surface, I think. Like that's sort of what we do, isn't it? When you're in a difficult situation, you make jokes, but I was also absolutely ecstatic. So they came down to find me, and they said to me, well, we weren't prepared to find someone injured, we were looking for a body. Because after that many days in that heat, that tends to be what they're finding. So they said, okay, well, we're going to have to get some equipment in to get you out of here, because your injuries are pretty bad. They thought that I wouldn't walk again. So they had to call in another chopper, and then they came in and dropped the stretcher off. And I remember Manny, who was one of the guys who found me, he said to me, "Don't worry, they're going to bring some painkillers for you." And I was like, yes, thank you, that sounds great. And in comes the other chopper. An officer long lines down into the canyon. She has the stretcher. He says, "Have you got any medicine?" She's like, "No, we don't have any of that. We're the California Highway Patrol. We just got the stretcher." So then he had to come and break that news to me. And from there, it was a case of trying to extricate me from this canyon and the dirt that I'd pretty much convinced would be my resting place. But I was extracted and taken to Palm Springs Hospital, and that's where I found out what had happened. And I like to use this as an example of why you should always wear sunscreen and why water can help you, your complexion. So, just saying. So they put me on a drip, got fluids into me, and slowly started to piece together the story of how anybody managed to find me. The initial answer is kind of embarrassing, and it's the fact that I hadn't been posting on Instagram. I'm not proud of that. It's kind of, as I say, it's an embarrassing fact, but it did save my life. But it's also very, very telling. that had become the main way that people in my life communicated with me. It was the way that I could keep people at arm's length and do that thing where I'm hiding again, right? And I'm projecting just the best side of myself all the time. I didn't have to have a real connection with people, you know. I even got to the point where I wasn't ringing my mum all the time. She just followed me on Instagram. Everyone's just seeing what I'm doing, and I don't actually have to get too deep and get too into the weeds with people. So that was a big realization. But then once a couple of people noticed I'd been quiet on Instagram, the people who I was house sitting for tried to call the house, say what's up. I wasn't there. They then sent some friends round to the house to check on me. The friends said, no, the car's not here, and we don't think she's been here for a while because the litter box has not been changed in quite some time. They also found a planner. I'm a bit of a spreadsheet nerd, but I had made an old school paper spreadsheet with all the little trails that I was going to do. And the last one that I had was the previous Tuesday to the Lost Palms Oasis. And so they sent someone out to the trailhead, and that's when they found the car. And so all of these little tiny threads had somehow been woven together, and I couldn't quite believe it. What I also couldn't believe was that now my life was suddenly full of people, and I didn't realize how many people I had in my life. I'd been such a loner. Like I say, I'd been independent. But all these people came together just to sort of reconnect with me. And I had new friends now too, including my rescuers, Manny and Eric. And I would meet up with Manny later on, and he told me, he said, I was so amazed at where we found you that I had to take a picture. So they found me in that little tiny hole above the tip of his finger. And the fact that I'd even come over that part of the park was completely by chance. So apparently, Eric, the pilot, said, we need to leave the park because we need to refuel. So they were leaving, and at the last minute he said, let's just take a little diversion to this one area where 10 years ago I recall a guy got lost or something. Again, this tiny little thread. And so they went over that part of the park, and that's when Manny, who was on lookout, saw something which looked like rubbish blowing around in the desert, and there's a lot of that about. They're always seeing it. But something made him go, I just want to go back and double check. And he got his binoculars out. And in that little hole, he saw this little flash of white moving very, very quickly, which was a plastic bag on the end of a stick. So it's kind of, I still don't quite understand how it all worked out, to be honest. But I have since talked to other search and rescue people, who I think are amazing. And one of them was telling me all about the survival tips that they learn in survival school. And one of them, which actually I hadn't thought about before, he says, one of them is that when you're in survival mode, you take an inventory. So you see what you have available to you and how you can use it, which is what I did when I first fell, and I had my stick and my plastic bag, and I made myself a sunshade. But now I'm in this new life, and I'm looking around and realizing that actually one of the best resources that we have, one of the best tools that we have available to us is other people, which sounds really corny, but it's true. And all this time, I had refused to need other people. I had refused to ask for help. I had almost made it a point of pride that this is how I would conduct my life. I had made myself my only resource. I put all my eggs in one basket, and that basket was me. It's not a good survival strategy. I don't recommend it. And so now I went about determined to reconnect with the people in my life, reconnect with all those different versions of myself that I'd formerly hidden away, and allow other people to connect with those sides as well. This was the clarity that I had gone looking for when I went to Canada. It was not the method I had expected for finding that clarity, but it definitely was the biggest lesson I took away from that. And the thing is, And the thing is, it was thanks to other people that I survived. If I had just been relying solely on myself and no one else had come through for me, I wouldn't be here. And I was very lucky because the following January, I went back to Joshua Tree. Somebody asked me, they said, when did you know that you wanted to go back and do the hike? And the true answer is when I was still hanging from the helicopter. It was something about knowing that I had a chance to go back and finish it, felt like closure. But also, I still get to do the things that I love. I'm really very grateful for that. And this time, of course, I went with friends. There's no way in hell my mum was going to let me go by myself. I'm surprised she lets me out of the house without a crash helmet. But it was amazing. So we did the walk. One of my friends hadn't even done a hike before. And we made it to the Lost Palms Oasis, which, as you can see, is just quite an incredible sight to see in the middle of such a barren patch of the desert, in the Colorado desert. And since then, I've just finished walking the Te Araroa Trail from Cape Reinga to Bluff. And it's a way of trying to reconnect with New Zealand, having been that bratty little child who thought New Zealand was kind of boring. I've had my mind changed there as well. And along the way, building more relationships and putting myself out there. Even public speaking. So the thing is, I don't want my life to be ruled by fear anymore. And even though I still have all those same fears, those really pointless fears, because it's normal too, I know now that I made them up. If you think about it, all of the fears that you deal with on a day-to-day basis, how many of them are actually real threats, right? I think about imposter syndrome. I think about, a fear of failure. Those are not tangible threats. Those are not things that have happened. Those are not things that are actually going to hurt me. And when I realize that, I'm like, oh, well, that's a waste of time, isn't it? Those are basically, they're the snakes on that first night. They're all in my head, built out of fear. And if I can shine a light on them, I'll realize that they're not there and I can overcome them. And in the meantime, I can just remind myself that right here, right now, I am okay. I'm not in that canyon anymore. I remember that very real fear in the canyon and know that it's not the same thing. And if I ever am in a situation when I need to ask for help, then I do. I'm still very, very independent, but asking for help, I've now learned, makes me resourceful, not weak. And that's a very key point as well. And I know that in order to survive, I have to accept that other people are my greatest resource. And as long as I know I can ask for help, then it means when I'm in trouble, help will be coming. Thank you very much.